Hello, my beautiful viewers, and welcome back to another heartfelt story on this channel. Gentle smile. I'm sitting here with my coffee, just like I do every morning before diving into research for you all. Something happened last night that I wanted to share. After posting our last video, I stayed up until 3 a.m., reading through each of your comments. Not skimming, not browsing, truly reading. Your thoughts, your feedback, your personal struggles, they all matter deeply to me. Each notification that popped up on my screen represented a real person, someone who took time out of their day to connect with our little community here. One comment particularly moved me. A viewer described how a chance encounter at a coffee shop completely redirected the course of their life. How one fleeting moment, one decision to say hello, created ripples that eventually transformed everything they knew. That comment became the seed for today's story. What truly happens when a single night alters the entire trajectory of your life? When someone who began as a complete stranger suddenly becomes the center of your world in ways you could never have foreseen or prepared for. In today's story, we'll follow Jody Rosenblum, a brilliant young doctor who had her entire life meticulously mapped out. Her career path, her 5-year goals, even the precise timing for each of her professional milestones, all carefully arranged in perfect order. Until one evening, one conversation, one moment of uncharacteristic spontaneity shattered that ordered existence forever. One choice. One night. 4 heartbeats that would change everything. Today's story will guide us through an extraordinary emotional journey. We'll witness moments of pure passion that break through years of careful restraint. We'll feel the floor-dropping shock of life-changing news that arrives without warning. We'll admire the fierce determination of a woman facing impossible odds alone until she isn't. And ultimately, we'll discover how love can bloom in the most unexpected circumstances, between two people from entirely different worlds, brought together by fate and bound by 4 tiny lives they created together. So settle in, perhaps grab a tissue or two, because Oblivious to His Identity isn't just a story about surprise or secrets. It's about how sometimes the most beautiful futures come from the moments when all our careful plans fall apart. Let's begin. The Boston skyline glowed amber in the early morning light as Dr. Jody Rosenblum completed her rounds at Boston Children's Hospital. At just 28 years old, her white coat hung perfectly pressed on her slender frame, her stethoscope draped with practiced precision around her neck. Every child she visited received her full attention, a warm smile, a gentle touch, careful explanations delivered in terms they could understand. Remember, Zach, the medicine might taste a little bitter, but it's helping those soldier cells in your body fight off the invaders, she explained to a 6-year-old with pneumonia. The boy nodded solemnly, trusting her completely. As she made notes in his chart, a text notification lit up her phone screen. Her colleague Dr. Reynolds, board meeting moved up. Congrats packet on your desk. Jody allowed herself a small smile before tucking the phone away. The promotion to head of pediatric medicine had been announced yesterday, making her the youngest department head in the hospital's storied 150-year history. She'd received the news with the same composed professionalism that characterized everything in her life, thanking the board with a firm handshake and measured words of gratitude. Only later, alone in her office, had she allowed herself a moment of pure joy, calling the one person who would truly understand what this meant. The key turned smoothly in the lock of her Beacon Hill apartment later that evening. The space reflected Jody's personality, perfectly organized, elegant, and meticulously maintained. Bookshelves lined the living room walls, arranged not by author or title but by medical specialty. Cardiology texts with red binding tabs. Neurology with blue. Pediatric specialties with green. Her coffee table displayed precisely 3 medical journals, the latest issues of the New England Journal of Medicine, Pediatrics, and The Lancet, arranged in a perfect row, corners aligned at exactly the same angle. A subscription notification from her phone calendar reminded her that tomorrow she would rotate in the new issues and file the old ones in their designated storage boxes. Jody hung her coat on the designated hook before moving to the kitchen where a large wall calendar dominated the space. Color-coded entries filled nearly every square, blue for hospital shifts, green for research time, purple for board meetings, yellow for rare social engagements. Red circles marked grant submission deadlines. Orange stars indicated journal publication dates. For the next 3 years, she had mapped out every professional milestone with careful precision. Next month, submit research on pediatric autoimmune disorders. 6 months, complete fellowship application. 18 months, secure research funding. 24 months, publish in a top-tier journal. 36 months, consideration for the National Pediatric Research Award. Each goal built logically on the previous one. Each achievement a carefully placed stepping stone toward the career she had envisioned since she was 12 years old. Her gaze lingered on next Tuesday, the only personal appointment on the entire calendar: dinner with her mother. A monthly tradition never missed, no matter how demanding her schedule became. The thin manila envelope sat unopened on her kitchen counter, the official congratulatory letter confirming her appointment as head of pediatric medicine. She ran her fingers over the hospital crest embossed on the front, allowing herself another moment of quiet satisfaction. Dr. Jody Rosenblum, head of pediatric medicine at Boston Children's Hospital. The youngest in the institution's history by nearly a decade. She opened the refrigerator and pulled out a single champagne flute and the small bottle of Veuve Clicquot she had purchased on her way home, her one concession to celebration. Pouring precisely half the bottle, saving the rest for another achievement, another day, she carried the glass to her home office. The walls here told the story of her rise. Her medical school diploma from Johns Hopkins, graduated summa cum laude. Her residency completion certificate. Awards for research excellence. A framed copy of her first published paper. And newest, waiting to be hung, the official department head portrait, still wrapped in protective paper. She'd chosen her outfit for that portrait with characteristic attention to detail: the navy suit projecting authority, the minimal jewelry suggesting focus rather than vanity, her hair pulled back in a neat bun that emphasized her sharp, intelligent eyes. The photographer had suggested she smile more broadly, but Jody had insisted on the slight, professional curve of lips that had become her signature expression. "You're making history, Dr. Rosenblum," the photographer had said. "Youngest department head ever. That deserves a real smile." But Jody knew better. Being the youngest meant every move was scrutinized, every decision questioned. A woman in a position traditionally held by men 20 years her senior couldn't afford to appear too emotional, too approachable. The slight smile conveyed confidence without warmth, exactly the image she needed to project. She raised her champagne in a silent toast to her reflection in the window. "To making history," she whispered. Her phone buzzed with an incoming call, the screen displaying mom with a small heart emoji, the only trace of sentimentality in her otherwise utilitarian device. "Hi, Mom," Jody answered, her professional tone softening instantly. "There's my department head." Ruth Rosenblum's voice came through, warm and proud. "I've told everyone at the diner. Mrs. Kaplan left you a chocolate babka, by the way. I'll bring it next Tuesday." Jody smiled genuinely now, the kind of smile she reserved only for her mother. "You didn't have to tell everyone." "Of course I did. My daughter, the doctor who runs the department. Why wouldn't I tell everyone?" Moving to her living room window, Jody gazed out at the glittering Boston skyline, a view that cost more per month than her mother had made in several months during Jody's childhood. Ruth Rosenblum had raised her alone in a small 2-bedroom apartment in Dorchester, working as a waitress at the local diner during the day and cleaning offices at night. "I couldn't have done it without you, Mom," Jody said quietly. "Nonsense. You did this with that brilliant brain of yours." But they both knew the truth. Every tip Ruth had saved. Every extra shift she'd taken. The second mortgage on their small apartment. The night classes Ruth had taken to become a bookkeeper, adding a third job to her exhausting schedule, all to ensure Jody could attend the best schools, could focus on her studies rather than working part-time, could have the opportunities Ruth never did. "I've got your picture from the hospital newsletter right here on the fridge," Ruth continued. "Right next to your 8th grade science fair ribbon. Remember that project? The one about antibiotics." "Antibiotic resistance," Jody corrected automatically, her gaze drifting to the small, framed photo on her otherwise minimalist sideboard, the only personal photograph displayed in her entire apartment. In it, a 12-year-old Jody stood proudly beside her science project, Ruth's arm wrapped around her shoulders, both beaming at the camera. That was the moment, Jody remembered. The science fair where Dr. Markinson, a hospital volunteer judge, had taken an interest in her project, later becoming her mentor and writing her recommendation letter for the prestigious high school scholarship that changed everything. "I'm so proud of you, honey," Ruth said, her voice catching slightly. "Your father would have been too." Jody's hand moved automatically to the small silver locket around her neck, the only piece of jewelry she wore consistently. Inside was a tiny photo of the father she never knew, who had died before she was born. A man whose medical textbooks, carefully preserved by Ruth, had first inspired Jody's interest in medicine. "Oh, before I forget," Ruth added, "Esther called the diner looking for you. Said your phone was going straight to voicemail during your board meeting." Jody smiled, checking her watch. "She's probably calling to drag me out to celebrate." "Good. You should celebrate. All work and no play. Makes Jody a successful doctor," she finished their long-standing joke. "I'll call her back, Mom. Love you." No sooner had she ended the call than her phone buzzed again, a text from Esther Schneider, this time, as if conjured by the mention of her name. "Jody Rose Rosenblum. I know you're home staring at your medical journals instead of properly celebrating. I'm coming over in 30 with food and wine. No excuses. Your best friend since Biology 101 demands it." Jody shook her head, a genuine laugh escaping her lips. Esther was the polar opposite of Jody in almost every way: spontaneous where Jody was planned, expressive where Jody was reserved, boldly colorful where Jody was understated elegance. Yet somehow, their friendship had endured for nearly a decade. They had met during undergraduate orientation at Harvard, both scholarship students feeling out of place among the wealthy legacy admissions. Esther, the rabbi's daughter from Providence with wild curly hair and a laugh that filled rooms, had plopped down next to serious, focused Jody in Biology 101 and declared them study partners before Jody could object. "You look smart and I need an A," had been Esther's opening line. "I'll bring snacks and keep you from becoming a complete hermit." What began as a strategic academic partnership evolved into the most significant friendship of Jody's life. Through undergraduate studies, through Jody's medical school and Esther's law school, through Esther's painful breakups and Jody's rare, cautious dates, through holidays and celebrations and the stomach flu of 2018 that had left them both quarantined in their shared apartment for a miserable week, they had remained constants in each other's lives. Now Esther was a rising star at Goldman and Associates, specializing in medical malpractice defense, their careers complementary yet independent, their lives intertwined despite their differences. True to her word, 28 minutes later, Jody's doorbell rang. She opened it to find Esther balancing a tower of takeout containers and a bottle of expensive wine, her curly hair pulled into a messy bun, still wearing her courtroom suit but with the jacket discarded and the blouse partially unbuttoned in her typical end-of-day transformation. "The Queen has arrived bearing gifts for the new department head," Esther announced grandly, sweeping past Jody into the apartment. "Clear those journals off your coffee table, Dr. Rosenblum. Tonight, we feast and celebrate properly." "First," Esther declared, kicking off her heels and setting up the food on Jody's spotless coffee table, "we toast to Dr. Jody Rosenblum, the youngest department head in Boston children's history and my personal hero since she explained cellular mitosis to me at 3 in the morning before finals." Jody accepted the wine glass, smiling despite herself. This was why she needed Esther to force moments of joy into her meticulously organized existence. To making medical history, Esther continued, raising her glass high. To achieving the next goal on the list, Jody corrected, clinking glasses. Esther's expression softened as she studied her friend. Is that all it is to you? Another checkbox. Jody sank onto the couch, suddenly feeling the weight of the day. Of course not. It's everything I've worked for. But sometimes Jody hated how well Esther could read her. But nothing. It's a tremendous achievement. Jody, Esther said, using her courtroom voice. I've known you for 10 years. I can tell when something's bothering you. The perfectly maintained facade cracked, just slightly. It's just. I got the promotion, I'm exactly where my 10-year plan said I should be. Everything has unfolded precisely as I mapped it out. And that's bad? Esther asked, confused. Jody stared into her wine glass. No. It's perfect. Too perfect maybe. She struggled to find the words for the hollowness she occasionally felt in the quiet moments between achievements. Do you remember Professor Levinson's speech at graduation? About how a life without passion is merely existence. Vaguely. I was too busy panicking about my student loans. He said that success without joy is just an empty trophy. And sometimes I wonder if you're collecting empty trophies. Esther finished softly. Jody nodded, feeling almost guilty for the admission. She loved her work, loved her patients, took immense satisfaction in each diagnosis and treatment plan. But sometimes, in the rare quiet moments between her carefully scheduled achievements, a question surfaced, is this all there is? When was the last time you did something completely unplanned? Esther asked. Something that wasn't on your calendar or your 5-year plan. Jody thought for a moment, then shrugged. I bought these shoes without researching them first. She offered weakly, pointing to her sensible leather loafers. Esther laughed, but her eyes remained serious. You've achieved everything you set out to do, Jody. You're brilliant at healing children. Your research is changing lives. But when do you actually live your own life? I am living, Jody protested. Just, efficiently. Efficiently, Esther repeated, shaking her head. You know what? This calls for more than takeout and my cheap wine. We're going out Friday night. I have research notes to review on Friday. They'll wait. The board just gave you an entire department to run. You've earned one night of actual celebration. One night where Dr. Jody Rosenblum lets her hair down literally and figuratively. Jody opened her mouth to protest but stopped herself. That hollow feeling echoed inside her again, the sense that something was missing, that professional achievements alone couldn't fill her life completely. Fine, she conceded finally. One night. But nothing too wild. Define wild, Esther challenged with a mischievous grin. Nothing involving bail money or photos that could affect my medical license. Esther laughed, raising her glass again. To one night of carefully controlled spontaneity for Dr. Rosenblum. Jody smiled and clinked glasses, not knowing that carefully controlled would be the first casualty of the night that would change everything. Absolutely not, Jody said firmly, staring at the invitation on her phone screen 3 days later. The Meridian? Esther, that's the most exclusive club in Boston. People wait months for reservations. Esther lounged across Jody's office sofa, somehow managing to look perfectly at ease despite the formal setting. Lucky for you, I defended the owner's daughter in a malpractice suit last year. He owes me a favor. It's a weeknight. I have early rounds tomorrow. You're the department head now. Delegate, Esther countered. Besides, the Meridian's rooftop closes at midnight. You'll be home and tucked into bed with your medical journals by 12:30. Jody glanced at her computer calendar, at the blocks of color-coded commitments. There was no reasonable excuse, she'd already completed tomorrow's preparation work. Fine, she conceded, ignoring Esther's triumphant smile. But I'm wearing something professional. Nothing flashy. About that, Esther said, pulling out her phone. I took the liberty of ordering a few options. They're being delivered to your place as we speak. You did what? Consider it my promotion gift. And don't worry, I remembered your nothing too revealing rule from residency. These are all Jody approved, just with a touch more celebration and a touch less hospital board meeting. I can dress myself, you know, Jody muttered. I've been doing it successfully for 28 years. Successfully, yes. Excitingly, no. Esther stood, straightening her suit jacket. Tonight is special, Dr. Rosenblum. The outfit should match the occasion. Later that evening, Jody stood before her bedroom mirror, almost not recognizing the woman who stared back. 4 garment bags had arrived at her apartment, each containing an outfit far more daring than anything in her carefully curated wardrobe. But it was the emerald dress, the one she'd purchased on impulse during a medical conference in Paris last year and never found the courage to wear, that she'd ultimately chosen. The silk material caught the light as she turned, the deep green hue making her hazel eyes appear more golden than usual. The cut was modest by most standards, high neckline, hem falling just above the knee, but the way it hugged her figure told a different story than her typical boxy blazers and straight-line skirts. It's just one night, she reminded her reflection, reaching for the pins that kept her chestnut hair in its standard severe bun. One by one, she removed them, placing each carefully on her vanity in a neat row. When the last pin was free, her hair cascaded well past her shoulders in soft waves. She ran her fingers through it tentatively, remembering how long it had been since she'd worn it down outside of her apartment. 5 months. 6. Her hand hovered over her usual understated makeup kit before moving to the gift set Esther had given her last Christmas, still unopened, the seal intact. For when you finally remember you're 28, not 58, the card had read. With careful precision, she followed the instructions for what the packaging called a subtle smoky eye, though to Jody, the result seemed anything but subtle. The woman in the mirror looked confident, perhaps even alluring. A stranger wearing her face. Her phone buzzed with Esther's text, "Car downstairs in 10. If you're wearing one of your boring black dresses, I'm sending you back up to change." Jody slipped on the stroppy heels that matched the dress, another unworn purchase, and reached for her practical black handbag before hesitating. Instead, she opened her closet's back corner, finding the small clutch her mother had splurged on for her medical school graduation. It matched the dress perfectly, as if they'd been waiting all this time to be paired together. As a final touch, she removed her ever-present locket, the metal suddenly seeming too utilitarian against the elegance of the dress. In its place, she fastened the pair of emerald earrings that had been her grandmother's, her only family heirloom of value. One night, she whispered again to her reflection, surprised by the flutter of anticipation in her stomach. One night of not being Dr. Rosenblum. The sleek black car pulled up to the Meridian precisely at 8 o'clock. The building rose 40 stories above Boston's financial district, its upper levels wrapped in blue-tinted glass that reflected the city lights like a shimmering mirage. "I still don't understand how you got us in here," Jody murmured as the doorman, dressed in an impeccable suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent, greeted them by name. "Magic of the legal profession," Esther replied with a wink, resplendent in a deep burgundy jumpsuit that complemented her olive complexion. "Or possibly blackmail. A lady never tells." The private elevator required a key card, which the hostess scanned before sending them gliding upward in silent luxury. Jody watched the floor numbers climb, her doctor's instinct automatically calculating how quickly they'd need to evacuate in case of emergency. Old habits. "Stop thinking about escape routes," Esther chided, somehow reading her mind. "Tonight is about embracing, not escaping." When the elevator doors opened on the 40th floor, Jody had to suppress a gasp. The Meridian's rooftop lounge was essentially a glass jewel box perched atop the city. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a 360-degree panorama of Boston, the Charles River winding its silvery path, the golden dome of the State House, the twinkling chains of lights marking the Zakim Bridge. The space itself exuded understated wealth, no flashy decorations or gaudy fixtures, just clean lines, premium materials, and perfect execution. Crystal glasses caught and refracted light, the bar top appeared to be a single slab of backlit onyx, and the low seating was arranged to maximize both views and privacy. The clientele matched the setting, beautiful people in beautiful clothes, speaking in modulated tones while soft jazz played from hidden speakers. Staff members moved with practiced grace, anticipating needs before they arose. Ms. Schneider, Dr. Rosenblum, the maitre d' greeted them. "Your table awaits. Mr. Caswell sends his personal welcome and hopes you'll accept the champagne with his compliments." Esther shot Jody a triumphant look as they followed him to a corner table that somehow managed to have the best view in the entire establishment. "When you said celebration, I was thinking more along the lines of that Italian place near the hospital," Jody whispered as they were seated. "That's where we go when you ace your board exams," Esther replied. "Department heads celebrate in style." A waiter appeared silently, presenting a bottle of champagne in an ice bucket. "Dom Perignon Rose, 2008, he announced. "Mr. Caswell thought you might appreciate this particular vintage." As he expertly poured 2 flutes of the pale pink liquid, Jody realized she had entered a world entirely different from her hospital corridors and research labs, a world where people casually sent $1,000 bottles of champagne and everyone seemed to move with choreographed precision. Jody took a small sip of the champagne, allowing herself to appreciate the complex notes of berry and toast that lingered on her tongue. The bubbles seemed to rise through her, lightening something that had been weighted down for too long. "A toast," Esther declared, raising her glass. "To Dr. Jody Rosenblum, the most brilliant, dedicated, and frustratingly organized person I know." Jody raised an eyebrow. "That's your toast?" "I'm not finished," Esther mock scolded. "To my best friend who has achieved everything she set out to do through sheer determination and intelligence. Who saves children's lives daily. Who deserves, for at least one night, to set aside the weight of responsibility and simply exist in a moment without analyzing it, planning it, or calculating its potential outcomes." The sincerity in Esther's voice caught Jody off guard. She raised her glass slightly, uncomfortable with both the praise and the challenge embedded in her friend's words. "Tonight isn't about securing your next promotion or impressing the board," Esther continued, softer now. "It isn't about networking or career advancement. Tonight is about living in the moment, feeling the champagne bubbles without counting calories, observing beauty without clinical detachment, allowing yourself to exist beyond the borders of your carefully drawn life map." "You make me sound like some kind of robot," Jody protested mildly. "Not a robot," Esther corrected. "More like someone who's been holding her breath for so long she's forgotten how exhilarating it feels to exhale." Jody glanced around the elegant space, at the beautiful people living their beautiful lives. What would it be like to move through the world so freely? To make choices based on desire rather than calculation? "I don't know how to turn it off," she admitted quietly. "The planning, the analyzing. It's how I survived med school, residency. It's how I function." "I'm not asking you to turn it off forever," Esther said, reaching across to squeeze her hand. "Just, dimmer switch it for one evening. The world won't collapse if Dr. Jody Rosenblum experiences an unscheduled moment of joy." The champagne warmed Jody's blood, and something about the rarefied air 40 stories above Boston made her nod slowly. "Dimmer switch," she agreed. "Not off, but lower." Esther beamed, clinking their glasses together. "Now that's what I call progress. And look at you in that dress, I barely recognized you." The real Jody Rosenblum, emerging from her lab coat chrysalis like a butterfly. "Don't push it," Jody warned, but she was smiling too. "Fine, fine. Let's start small. Tonight, we're not leaving until you've done 3 things that aren't on any schedule or plan. Such as ordering dessert before dinner. Or dancing if you hear a song you like. Or," Esther's eyes gleamed mischievously, "talking to a stranger who catches your eye." As the evening progressed, Jody felt increasingly like a researcher observing an exotic ecosystem. Esther moved through the space with natural confidence, exchanging air kisses with a fashion editor she'd once met at a charity gala, chatting easily with the sommelier about Portuguese wine regions, laughing at a joke from a table of finance executives who seemed delighted by her attention. Meanwhile, Jody remained perched at their table, body language still clinical despite the emerald dress and flowing hair. She maintained perfect posture, knees together, champagne glass held precisely, her smile measured and restrained when anyone approached. "That's Justin Kwan," Esther whispered after returning from what she called a reconnaissance mission to the bar. "The restaurateur who's opening that fusion place everyone's talking about. And over there the woman in white, she runs half the art galleries in the city." "Fascinating," Jody murmured, though her tone suggested otherwise. "You haven't moved from this spot in 45 minutes, Esther observed. "The point of coming somewhere like this isn't to conduct a sociological study from the corner." "I'm being sociable," Jody protested. "I had a very pleasant conversation with the waiter about the sustainable fishing practices they use for the sea bass." Esther stared at her. "You interrogated the poor man about supply chain management?" He looked terrified. "He provided very detailed information," Jody countered. "I found it educational." "Right. Educational." Esther sighed dramatically. "Look, I'm going to mingle a bit more. The attorney for the Celtics is here, and I've been trying to get my firm an introduction for months." She stood, adjusting her jumpsuit. "Why don't you try?" "I don't know, existing in this space without analyzing everyone like they're bacteria under your microscope." Jody forced a smile. "Go. Network. I promise not to diagnose anyone while you're gone." Left alone, Jody felt her professional mask slipping back into place despite the champagne and the dress. This was why she rarely ventured into such scenes. She didn't have the social programming for them. In the hospital, her reserve was respected, even admired. Here, it marked her as an outsider. A laughing couple moved past her table, the woman's hand resting casually on her partner's arm. A group of executives clinked glasses in a toast. Near the bar, a well-dressed woman threw her head back in genuine delight at something her companion said. They all seemed to know the steps to a dance Jody had never learned. She could perform complex surgeries, diagnose obscure conditions, manage medical crises with cool-headed precision, but this easy social fluency remained beyond her grasp. She checked her watch discreetly, 9:48 p.m. Early enough to leave without Esther protesting too much. She could claim an early meeting, review tomorrow's cases in the quiet of her apartment, return to the world where she knew all the rules and expectations. As Jody reached for her clutch, mentally composing her exit strategy, a deep voice interrupted her thoughts. "Leaving before dessert? That violates at least 3 Meridian traditions." Before she could respond to the voice, movement across the room caught Jody's attention. The crowd seemed to part subtly, like water around a stone. A man had entered from a private elevator at the far end of the lounge, tall enough to command attention without effort, his presence altering the atmosphere in a way Jody could almost measure. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that suggested wealth without announcing it. No flashy accessories or obvious designer logos, just the unmistakable fit of clothing made specifically for his frame. His dark hair was cut precisely, not fashionably or stylishly, but with the same exacting standards evident in everything about him. What struck Jody most was how he moved through the space. Unlike the social butterflies who flitted from group to group or the power players who ensured everyone noticed their arrival, this man walked with purpose and confidence that required no validation. He nodded briefly to staff members, who straightened almost imperceptibly as he passed. Several patrons attempted to catch his attention, but he acknowledged them with practiced efficiency rather than genuine engagement. A curious detachment surrounded him. He was clearly accustomed to this environment yet not quite of it. Something in his manner reminded Jody of the attending surgeons she most respected, those who entered operating rooms knowing exactly who they were and what they were capable of, requiring no external confirmation of their authority. As he paused near the bar, the low lighting caught the angle of his jaw, the straight line of his shoulders. His profile revealed features that seemed carved with intention: strong brow, straight nose, defined jawline. Not conventionally handsome in the way of actors or models, but compelling in a more lasting manner. When he turned slightly to accept a drink, Jody noticed a small scar above his right eyebrow, the only imperfection in an otherwise flawless presentation. Somehow, that tiny mark of humanity made him more rather than less intriguing. He scanned the room with measured assessment, not searching but observing. When his gaze reached Jody's corner, it stopped. For 3 heartbeats Jody counted them automatically, their eyes locked across the crowded space. His were dark, intensely focused, as if he could discern her molecular structure from 40 feet away. She felt strangely exposed, as though those eyes could see past her emerald dress to the lab coats and surgical scrubs that defined her existence. Instead of looking away politely as social convention dictated, he continued to regard her with undisguised interest. Not the typical male appreciation of a woman in a flattering dress, but something more analytical, as if she were a complex equation he was solving in his head. Then, something unexpected happened. His expression shifted, the barest hint of surprised recognition crossing his features. Not as if he knew her, Jody was certain they had never met, but as if he recognized something in her that resonated with something in himself. A slight nod, almost imperceptible. A decision made. He began moving toward her table with deliberate steps. Jody felt an unfamiliar flutter in her stomach as the man moved purposefully through the crowd toward her table. Her analytical mind instantly catalogued the sensation as an autonomic nervous system response: elevated pulse, mild respiratory acceleration, peripheral blood vessel dilation. In medical terms, fight or flight. Except this wasn't fear. This was something else entirely. Before he could reach her, Esther materialized at the table, eyes wide with excitement. "Jody," she hissed, gripping her friend's arm with uncharacteristic intensity. "Don't look now, but Daniel Holliday is walking directly toward us." "Who?" Jody asked, genuinely confused by both Esther's reaction and the name. Esther's perfectly arched eyebrows shot upward. "Are you serious? Daniel Holliday? Holliday Enterprises? The tech genius who revolutionized sustainable energy storage? The billionaire who built that massive carbon capture facility in Norway?" Jody shrugged slightly. "I don't follow business news." "He's not just business news," Esther whispered urgently. "He donated that entire wing to Boston Children's last year. The Holliday Pediatric Research Center? Where you literally work." Recognition flickered. "Oh. The donor who insisted on no naming ceremony and refused press coverage. The board was upset because they couldn't leverage the publicity." "Yes, that minor detail," Esther said dryly. "He's notoriously private. I've never seen him at an event like this before." She smoothed her hair quickly. "He's probably coming to speak with me about the Reynolds case. I mentioned to Justin that Holliday Enterprises might be." "I don't believe we've met," came a deep voice, interrupting Esther's speculation. He stood at their table now, his presence somehow more substantial up close. Tall but not imposingly so, with an economy of movement that suggested physical discipline. His focus was directed entirely at Jody, as if Esther had temporarily ceased to exist. "I'm Daniel Holliday," he said, extending his hand to Jody. Jody shook his hand with professional firmness. Dr. Jody Rosenblum, the new head of pediatric medicine at Boston Children's Hospital, he added, surprising her. Congratulations on the appointment. The youngest in the institution's history, I believe. Esther cleared her throat pointedly. Daniel turned, as if noticing her for the first time. Esther Schneider, she introduced herself, extending her hand with a dazzling smile. Goldman and Associates. We handled the Reynolds litigation for Caswell Properties last quarter. Of course, he responded politely, though his attention immediately returned to Jody. Would you mind if I joined you for a moment, Dr. Rosenblum? Before Jody could respond, Esther jumped in. Actually, I was just leaving to speak with the Celtics counsel. She gathered her clutch, shooting Jody a look that screamed, this is your unscheduled moment. Daniel, please take my seat. The champagne is excellent, Mr. Caswell's selection. As Esther glided away, she mouthed oh my God at Jody from behind Daniel's back, then made an exaggerated fanning motion with her hand. Daniel took the vacated seat, signaling a waiter who appeared instantly at his side. Another bottle of the rose for the doctor, he instructed, and the usual for me. The waiter nodded and departed with silent efficiency. The usual? Jody asked, curiosity overcoming her initial reserve. Macallan 25, 2 ice cubes, he replied with the hint of a smile. A predictable choice, perhaps, but I find it reliable. You come here often, then? I own the building, he said simply, without pride or pretense. The top floor is my residence when I'm in Boston. That explained the staff's reaction to his arrival, Jody realized. Not a VIP guest but the actual owner. That must be convenient, she said, internally wincing at how mundane the comment sounded. Efficiency matters, he replied. May I ask what brings a dedicated physician to the Meridian on a Thursday evening? Most of the doctors I know would be reviewing cases or catching precious sleep. Most of the doctors you know would be correct, Jody admitted. This isn't my usual habitat. My friend Esther insisted we celebrate my promotion. And you agreed reluctantly, he observed, not asking but stating. Jody found herself surprised by his perception. How did you know? His eyes dark brown, she now saw studied her with genuine interest. The way you hold yourself. Alert, assessing. Like someone in an unfamiliar environment calculating exit routes. The accuracy of his observation was unsettling. Are you always this perceptive of strangers, Mr. Holliday? Daniel, he corrected. And only when they're worth perceiving. The waiter returned with fresh champagne and a crystal tumbler of amber liquid. As he poured Jody's glass, she noticed how everyone in the immediate vicinity seemed hyper-aware of Daniel's presence. Covert glances, hushed conversations, subtle repositioning to appear more advantageous. I should probably admit something, Jody said after the waiter departed. Until Esther mentioned your name, I didn't know who you were. Rather than offense, his expression showed genuine surprise, followed by what appeared to be relief. That's refreshing, he said. Most people in Boston have preconceived notions about me before we've exchanged a single word. I'm afraid I don't follow much outside the medical world, Jody explained. My subscriptions are to journals like The Lancet and JAMA, not Forbes or The Wall Street Journal. So you don't know about the Holiday Empire? The tech innovations. The controversial carbon recapture programs. There was amusement in his voice, but not mockery. I know you donated the new research wing at Boston Children's, she offered. The one you didn't want named after you, which confused the board tremendously. They had already ordered the engraved plaque. He laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his serious features. That sounds like Ellsworth. He was quite persistent. Chairman Ellsworth said, and I quote, in my 40 years on this board, I've never met a billionaire who didn't want his name plastered on a building. And what did you think of my anonymous donation, Dr. Rosenblum? His eyes remained fixed on hers, genuinely curious about her answer. I thought it showed either exceptional humility or exceptional strategy, she replied honestly. The mystery billionaire became more interesting by refusing the spotlight. Every doctor in the hospital speculated about your motivations. Including you. I was more interested in what the equipment could do than who paid for it, she admitted. The new MRI has reduced pediatric scanning times by 40%. That means 40% fewer children needing sedation for their scans. He nodded, appreciating her focus. And that matters more than whose name is on the door. Always, she said with conviction. Results matter. Children's lives matter. The rest is just noise. Something shifted in his expression, a recognition, as if she'd unknowingly answered a question he'd been silently asking. You truly don't care, do you? He said softly. About who I am beyond this conversation. About Holiday Enterprises or the Fortune 500 ranking or any of it? Jody suddenly worried she'd offended him. I didn't mean to dismiss your accomplishments. No, he interrupted gently. It's not an accusation. It's remarkable. Do you know how rarely I speak with someone who isn't calculating what they might gain from the interaction? That shade of green, Daniel said, his gaze briefly taking in her dress, reminds me of the Rodriguez installation at the Kuzuma Foundation in Tokyo. Have you seen it? The sudden shift surprised Jody. I haven't. My knowledge of art is embarrassingly limited. The installation uses light and reflection to create the sensation of infinite space, emerald green expanding forever. The artist's statement explains it as representing the boundless potential of human consciousness. He spoke with genuine enthusiasm rather than pretension. The color you're wearing is remarkably similar. I chose it because it matched my eyes, Jody admitted with unexpected frankness. He smiled. A more practical approach. I appreciate that. You're interested in art? She asked, finding the contrast with his tech empire intriguing. In beauty and innovation in all forms, he clarified. Art, science, medicine, technology, they're all expressions of human potential. Different languages describing the same fundamental truths. The waiter appeared with a small tray of hors d'oeuvres Jody hadn't ordered. The chef thought you might enjoy these, the waiter explained. The yellowtail was flown in from Hokkaido this morning. Daniel nodded in thanks before turning back to Jody. You mentioned The Lancet earlier. Did you read their series on climate change's impact on global disease migration patterns? Every issue, she confirmed, surprised again. Are you interested in infectious disease? I'm interested in interconnected systems, he replied, selecting one of the delicate bites. Climate shifts impact agriculture, which affects nutrition, which influences public health outcomes. No problem exists in isolation. That's why Holiday Enterprises funded mobile clinics in southern Indonesia after the flooding last year, Jody realized, connecting the dots. I read about the initiative in a WHO brief. They didn't mention your company by name. We prefer effective action to public recognition, he said. The clinics were part of a larger approach addressing immediate medical needs while implementing sustainable infrastructure changes to prevent future crises. Jody found herself leaning forward slightly. The brief mentioned a unique vaccine distribution system using solar-powered refrigeration units. Was that your design? His eyes lit with genuine pleasure at her question. The core technology, yes. My team adapted it for field conditions. We reduced weight by 30% while increasing cold chain reliability. That's remarkable, she said sincerely. Cold chain failures account for nearly 20% of vaccine wastage in remote regions. Exactly, he nodded, clearly pleased by her understanding. Simple technological solutions can bridge massive healthcare gaps. We're testing similar units in Central Africa next month. For nearly 30 minutes, they discussed global health challenges with increasing animation, Daniel explaining innovative technological approaches, Jody offering clinical perspectives on implementation. Neither dominated the conversation, each listened intently, building on the other's thoughts, challenging assumptions, finding unexpected common ground. Midway through explaining a particularly complex point about antibiotic resistance in refugee populations, Jody suddenly stopped, becoming aware of how animated she had become. Her hands were gesturing expressively, her voice passionate, her posture no longer rigidly controlled. She hadn't spoken this freely with anyone outside of medical conferences in years, certainly never with a stranger in a social setting. Daniel noticed her sudden self-consciousness. "Please continue," he encouraged. "Your perspective on localized treatment protocols is fascinating." "I'm sorry," she said, straightening slightly. "I don't usually. I mean, most people don't want to discuss antimicrobial stewardship programs at a rooftop lounge." "I'm not most people," he replied simply. "And clearly, neither are you." Something in his direct gaze made Jody feel simultaneously exposed and understood. With colleagues, she maintained professional distance. With Esther, she allowed warmth but rarely professional passion. With her mother, she downplayed medical complexities to avoid worry. But with this stranger, this billionaire tech innovator she'd known for less than an hour, she felt no need to filter or compartmentalize. The connection was immediate and unexpected, like recognizing a familiar scientific principle in an entirely new context. "It's refreshing," she admitted, "to have a conversation that isn't constrained by social norms about appropriate topics. Social norms are primarily designed to make mediocre interactions bearable," he observed. "When the connection is genuine, they become unnecessary limitations." His insight resonated with something Jody had always felt but never articulated. How many evenings had she endured of carefully curated small talk, longing for conversations of substance? "You appear surprised," Daniel noted, watching her response. "I am," she acknowledged honestly. "I don't typically connect with people easily. Especially outside professional contexts." "Because you maintain deliberate distance," he said, not questioning but understanding. "It's efficient. Creates clear boundaries. Prevents complications." Again, his perception was unsettlingly accurate. "Yes. Exactly. I employ the same strategy," he confessed. "People see the wealth, the company, the public persona. Keeping distance ensures interactions remain transactional rather than personal." "It's safer," Jody agreed. "Safer," he echoed, studying her face. "But occasionally." "Occasionally." His eyes held hers. "Occasionally, the potential value of genuine connection outweighs the calculated risk of vulnerability." The statement hung between them, weighted with meaning beyond the words themselves. Jody felt something shift in her chest, not the clinical flutter of nervous system response, but something deeper, more fundamental. A recognition. "Yes," she said softly. "Occasionally it does." As the evening progressed, their conversation deepened, moving beyond professional interests to the values and motivations that drove them. The meridian continued buzzing around them, but they created their own island of meaningful exchange amidst the social choreography. "What drew you to pediatric medicine specifically?" Daniel asked, signaling for fresh drinks with a subtle gesture. "The resilience," Jody answered without hesitation. "Children face devastating diagnoses with a courage most adults can't match. They live completely in the present, laughing during a chemotherapy session because someone brought a funny hat, or racing their 4 poles down the hallway despite major surgeries the day before." Her expression softened as she spoke about her patients. "They remind me daily of what matters. When a 7-year-old with leukemia worries more about her little brother being scared than about her own pain, that recalibrates your perspective permanently. And makes adult complaints seem rather trivial by comparison," Daniel observed. "Exactly. It's why I have limited patience for hospital politics or status games. A small smile played at her lips. My colleagues find me intense. Focused, he corrected. There's a difference. Jody appreciated his understanding. What about you? You could have built any kind of technology empire. Why focus on environmental innovations and medical applications? Daniel was quiet for a moment, considering his response. When he spoke, his tone had changed, more personal, less guarded. My mother died of a respiratory disease when I was 12, he said. The air quality in our town was compromised by a nearby industrial complex. No direct causation could be proven legally, but the correlation was clear to anyone paying attention. Too many cases, too concentrated in one area. Jody remained silent, recognizing the rare gift of genuine disclosure. I promised myself then that I would create solutions, not just treat symptoms, he continued. Technology that could prevent suffering rather than merely respond to it. Systems that value human lives over quarterly profits. That's why you fought the Norwegian government for the carbon capture facility, Jody realized. The business press called it a vanity project with no ROI. A flash of something, perhaps approval, that she knew this detail despite her claimed ignorance of business news crossed his face. The return isn't measured in currency. It's measured in parts per million of carbon dioxide removed. In reduced asthma rates in nearby communities. In water quality improvements downstream. Values-driven metrics, Jody nodded. We use similar frameworks in public health. Most business leaders consider such approaches idealistic, he said. Impractical. Most business leaders haven't watched a child struggle to breathe, she replied simply. Daniel studied her for a long moment. No. They haven't. The words carried weight beyond their simplicity. Do you think it's possible? Jody asked suddenly. To create systems that truly prioritize human well-being? Not just in medicine or environmental technology, but across society. I believe it's inevitable, he replied with unexpected conviction. Not from altruism, but necessity. The current extractive approaches are demonstrably unsustainable. That's surprisingly optimistic, she observed. Not optimism. Mathematical certainty. His expression was intense. The variables are complex, but the equations balance eventually. The only question is whether we make the adjustments proactively or reactively. You see the world as systems to be optimized, Jody noted. And you see it as individuals to be healed, he countered. Both perspectives are essential. As their conversation flowed, Jody became increasingly aware of subtle shifts in their interaction. The professional distance that initially separated them had gradually dissolved, replaced by something more charged, more magnetic. She found herself noticing details beyond his words, the way his hands moved with precision when emphasizing a point, the slight crease that formed between his brows when he was considering a complex idea, the rare but transformative nature of his genuine smile. His physical presence registered with increasing intensity, the breadth of his shoulders beneath the perfectly tailored jacket, the strength evident in his forearms when he rolled back his sleeves slightly. For his part, Daniel's attention remained focused entirely on her, as if the crowded rooftop contained only their table. His dark eyes held hers with growing warmth when she spoke, occasionally dropping to observe the animated expressions she hadn't realized were crossing her normally composed features. When she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture foreign to her usual tightly controlled body language, his gaze followed the movement with unmistakable appreciation. The space between them seemed to contract gradually throughout the evening. What began as a professional distance across the table had evolved into a proximity where she could detect the subtle notes of his cologne, something woodsy and complex, not overpowering but distinctly masculine. You disagree, he noted at one point, reacting to her slight frown during a discussion about predictive modeling in disease outbreaks. Not disagree exactly, she replied. I'm just considering the human variables your algorithm might not account for. Such as. He leaned forward slightly, genuinely curious rather than defensive. Cultural factors affecting reporting rates. Religious practices around treatment seeking. Family dynamics that influence quarantine compliance. As she elaborated, she realized he was watching her lips as she spoke, his focus intimate in a way that sent unexpected warmth through her chest and into her cheeks. The clinical part of her brain registered the physiological responses: elevated heart rate, peripheral vasodilation, pupillary dilation, but the analytical distance with which she usually observed such reactions in herself was dissolving. When their fingers brushed as they both reached for the water carafe, the brief contact sent a current of awareness along her arm. Rather than withdrawing with a polite apology, Daniel held her gaze for a heartbeat longer than social convention dictated, a silent acknowledgement of the charge between them. "May I ask you something, Jody?" he said, her name on his lips sounding oddly intimate despite its formality. She nodded, finding her throat unexpectedly dry. "Are you always this guarded? Or is it specific to situations like this?" The directness of the question, personal rather than professional, might have offended her from someone else. From him, it felt like an invitation to step beyond the careful boundaries she maintained. "Yes," she admitted. "Though I hadn't realized it was so obvious." "Not obvious," he corrected. "Recognizable. To me." "Because you do the same thing," she observed. His slight smile confirmed her insight. "Different methods, same objective." "And what objective is that?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Control," he said simply. "Maintaining the perimeter between self and other. Between vulnerability and safety." The honesty between them felt more intimate than any physical contact could have been, a recognition of kindred approaches to navigating a world neither of them quite fit into naturally. The meridian's subtle lighting shifted as midnight approached, dimming further to create pools of amber intimacy throughout the space. The jazz trio that had provided background music finished their set, replaced by a DJ who transitioned seamlessly from sophisticated lounge music to more rhythmic arrangements. Jody realized with surprise that nearly 3 hours had passed since Daniel had first approached her table. Her usual awareness of time, the internal clock that kept her precisely scheduled life running smoothly, had completely failed her. More surprising still was her lack of concern about this failure. Their conversation had traversed medicine, technology, global health, art, music, literature, each topic revealing new dimensions of compatibility and contrast between them. Wine had given way to water for Jody, champagne to whiskey for Daniel, both seemingly intent on maintaining clarity despite the deepening connection between them. "Your friend Esther has been watching us for the past 40 minutes, Daniel noted with amusement, nodding subtly toward the bar. Jody turned to see Esther pretending to be deeply engaged in conversation with a group of lawyers while shooting not-so-subtle glances their way. "She's probably shocked I haven't excused myself to review case notes or go to bed early," Jody admitted with a small laugh. "Is that your usual approach?" "Almost without exception. Esther calls it my emergency exit strategy for social events. I typically deploy it by 10 p.m. Daniel checked his watch, an understated timepiece that probably cost more than her annual salary. "It's nearly midnight. You've missed your window." "Apparently so," she agreed, realizing she had no desire to leave. The DJ shifted to a slower, more melodic track. Several couples moved to the small dance floor, their movements relaxed and intimate in the low light. "Do you dance, Dr. Rosenblum?" Daniel asked, his voice dropping slightly. The question should have activated Jody's instinctive retreat from such situations. Dancing meant proximity, meant surrendering control of personal space, meant a form of expression her body rarely practiced. "Not well," she answered honestly. "And not often." "Then we have something in common," he said, standing and extending his hand toward her. "Another skill we've likely sacrificed for professional excellence." The invitation hung between them, not a social formality but a genuine question. His eyes held hers without pressure or expectation. "One dance," she found herself saying, placing her hand in his. His palm was warm and dry against hers as he led her to the dance floor. The other dancers, beautiful people in beautiful clothes moving with practiced grace, seemed to fade into the periphery of her awareness. The floor-to-ceiling windows revealed Boston spread out below them like a galaxy of lights, but even this spectacular view receded from Jody's focus as Daniel turned to face her. With natural confidence, he placed one hand lightly at her waist, maintaining a respectful but intimate distance between them. His other hand kept hold of hers, raising it slightly in a traditional dance position that somehow felt entirely new to Jody. "Follow my lead," he said softly, beginning to move with the music. Jody had expected awkwardness, her usual physical self-consciousness magnified by the unfamiliar activity. Instead, she found her body responding with surprising ease to his guidance. His movements were measured and clear, his lead subtle but certain. When she momentarily tensed, his hand at her waist provided gentle reassurance. "You said you don't dance often," she noted as they moved together with increasing fluidity. "I didn't say I couldn't dance," he replied with the hint of a smile. "Some skills are fundamental across disciplines. Such as balance, rhythm, reading your partner's subtle cues." His eyes held hers as they turned slowly. Knowing when to lead and when to respond. As the song ended, neither of them immediately moved apart. The moment suspended between them, charged with unspoken possibility. Around them, the lounge had grown quieter as the hour approached closing time, many guests having already departed for the night. "Another?" Daniel asked, his voice low and meant only for her. Jody realized her hands still rested comfortably in his, their bodies still aligned in dance position despite the music's conclusion. The woman who had entered the Meridian hours earlier, controlled, cautious Dr. Rosenblum, would have stepped back immediately, would have thanked him politely for the dance and made her excuses to leave. Instead, she found herself responding, "Yes." As if responding to their decision, the DJ shifted to a slower, more intimate melody. Daniel drew her slightly closer, the space between them narrowing to something that could no longer be described as formal. His hand at her waist felt both protective and possessive, guiding her with subtle pressure as they moved together. The ambient sounds of the lounge, quiet conversations, the clink of glasses, the distant city noise faded into background sensation. Jody became acutely aware of more immediate details, the solid warmth of his shoulder beneath her hand, the subtle scent of his cologne mixed with the deeper note of his skin, the slight friction of his thumb moving almost imperceptibly against her waist. "What are you thinking?" he asked, his voice close to her ear. The question was simple but profound, an invitation to authenticity she rarely offered or received. "That I don't recognize myself tonight," she answered truthfully. "Everything I'm doing is outside my carefully drawn boundaries." His eyes met hers with unexpected intensity. "And how does that feel?" "Terrifying," she admitted. Then, after a heartbeat, "and exhilarating." Something shifted in his expression, appreciation of her honesty, perhaps, or recognition of his own similar experience. "I rarely spend evenings like this," he confessed. "The social performance, the expected interactions, they typically feel like a poor investment of time. But tonight?" she asked, surprising herself with her directness. "Tonight feels consequential," he replied. The simple statement carried weight beyond its brevity. As the song ended, they remained in their close position for several extended moments. When they finally stepped apart, something had crystallized between them, an understanding that transcended the conventional social scripts they'd both mastered but never fully embraced. Daniel glanced at his watch, then back to her. "It's past midnight. The lounge will be closing soon. I should find Esther," Jody said automatically, though her tone lacked conviction. "I believe your friend left about 20 minutes ago," he noted. "She waved in your direction, but you were distracted," Jody finished, realizing she hadn't noticed Esther's departure at all, something unprecedented in their friendship. They returned to their table, where a server had already prepared their belongings for departure. Daniel helped Jody with her wrap, his hands lingering briefly on her shoulders. "May I have my driver take you home?" he offered. The question seemed straightforward, but both recognized the decision point it represented. Jody considered her options with the clarity she applied to medical decisions, weighing factors, assessing risks and benefits, calculating probable outcomes. "Or," Daniel continued, his voice carrying no pressure, "only possibility, you could join me for a nightcap in my residence. The view from the private terrace surpasses even this one." The invitation hung between them. Jody knew the professional, responsible choice thank him for the evening, accept his offer of transportation home, exchange contact information, perhaps, maintain the boundary between a fascinating evening and something more complicated. Instead, she heard herself say, "I'd like to see that view." His eyes registered surprise, then pleasure. Not triumph or conquest, but genuine appreciation of her choice. "Are you certain?" he asked, offering her the chance to reconsider. Jody thought of her carefully planned life, her color-coded calendar, her measured professional interactions. She thought of tomorrow's responsibilities and potential complications. She thought of all the reasons this decision contradicted everything about the person she believed herself to be. Then she looked at Daniel, at the connection that had formed between them with unexpected speed and depth, at the recognition she felt in his presence, at the version of herself that had emerged in his company. "Yes," she said simply. "I'm certain." As they walked toward the private elevator that would take them to his residence, Jody felt a curious sense of alignment rather than deviation, as if this completely uncharacteristic choice was somehow the most authentic decision she had made in years. My dear viewers, if you're feeling drawn into Jody and Daniel's world right now, if you're connecting with their unexpected meeting and wondering where their story leads, I'd love to ask for your support. Take just a moment to hit that like button below. Your simple click helps these stories reach others who might need an escape or a moment of inspiration in their day. I spend countless hours researching and crafting each narrative I share with you, pouring my heart into every detail. Your engagement truly means everything to me and fuels my passion to continue bringing these emotional journeys to life. Gestures gently toward the like button. Now, let's continue following Jody and Daniel as their lives begin to change in ways neither could have anticipated. Sunlight streamed through Jody's bedroom window, the soft golden rays landing directly across her face. She stirred reluctantly, one hand reaching to block the brightness as consciousness slowly returned. The first sensation was unfamiliar comfort. Her body felt loose, relaxed in a way it rarely did after her typical 5 hours of efficient sleep. Then the memories flooded back. Daniel. The Meridian. Their conversation that had stretched for hours. The private elevator to his penthouse residence. The breathtaking terrace view of Boston at night. Wine glasses abandoned as conversation gave way to connection of a different kind. His hands. His voice. The unexpected tenderness beneath his controlled exterior. Jody sat bolt upright, fully awake now. She was in her own apartment, her own bed alone. Her emerald dress hung neatly over her vanity chair. Her shoes placed precisely side by side near the door. How had she gotten home? The final memories of the night were hazy, not from alcohol. She'd been careful with her consumption, but from the overwhelming emotional experience that had short-circuited her usually meticulous mental record-keeping. She remembered falling asleep in his bed, the city lights glimmering beyond floor-to-ceiling windows. She remembered his arm around her waist, the solid warmth of his body against her back. She did not remember returning to her own apartment. A glance at her bedside clock sent a shock through her system. 8:23 a.m. Dr. Jody Rosenblum had never, not once in her professional life, slept past 5:30 a.m. Not during med school finals, not during the grueling hours of residency, not even when she'd contracted influenza 2 years ago and worked through a 103-degree fever. On her nightstand sat a glass of water, a bottle of ibuprofen, and a folded piece of heavy cream-colored paper she didn't recognize. With slightly trembling fingers, she reached for the note. The handwriting was precise, the strokes confident without being showy. Thank you for a night I'll never forget. Life calls me away, but you've changed something in me. D. No phone number. No email address. No promise of future contact. Jody read the brief message 3 times, searching for hidden meaning in the carefully chosen words. The statement was both intimate and distant, personal yet formal, much like the man himself. Settling back against her pillows, Jody allowed herself a rare moment of emotional introspection. The sensations coursing through her were complex, contradictory, and entirely unfamiliar. Excitement pulsed just beneath her skin, a lingering electricity from hours spent in genuine connection with someone who seemed to understand her on a fundamental level. Her body felt alive in ways she typically ignored, awakened to sensations beyond the functional awareness she maintained as a doctor. The memory of his touch, confident yet considerate, sent warmth spreading across her chest. Yet threaded through the excitement ran a current of uncertainty. What did last night mean? Was it merely an anomaly, a temporary deviation from her carefully structured existence? Should she attempt to contact him again? Would he reach out to her? The lack of clear next steps, of defined parameters, left her feeling oddly untethered. And beneath it all lay something that resembled regret, not for what had happened, but for breaking her own carefully established rules. Dr. Jody Rosenblum did not act impulsively. She did not go home with men she had just met, regardless of how compelling their conversation or how powerful their presence. She did not allow herself to be vulnerable with strangers. She did not wake up alone with cryptic notes and gap-filled memories. What were you thinking? She whispered to the empty room, her analytical mind already cataloging potential repercussions. Professional complications. Personal entanglements. Emotional distractions from her carefully plotted career trajectory. The rational part of her brain, the surgeon's mindset that had served her so well, insisted that last night had been a mistake, a momentary lapse in judgment that required immediate compartmentalization. Yet another voice, quieter but persistent, suggested something else entirely, that perhaps the mistake wasn't what had happened with Daniel, but rather the rigid boundaries she'd constructed around her life that made such moments so vanishingly rare. Jody glanced again at the note, at his initial signed with such confident simplicity. D. As if she would never need his last name, as if their connection transcended such formalities. The presumption both irritated and intrigued her. She reached for her phone. 6 missed calls from Esther and a series of increasingly concerned text messages. You went home with him. Jody Rosenblum, I need details immediately. Are you alive? Should I call hospitals? The police? The newspapers? If you don't respond in the next hour, I'm coming over with coffee and demanding a full report. The last message had arrived just 15 minutes ago. Jody quickly typed, I'm fine. At home. We'll call later. She set the phone down, her mind shifting to practical matters. Who had brought her home? How had they accessed her apartment? She didn't remember giving Daniel her address, though she must have. The note, the neatly hung dress, the precisely placed shoes all suggested care rather than haste. Not an awkward dismissal, but a considered departure. Jody spent the next 30 minutes searching for information about her mysterious companion. Despite Esther's excited recognition at the Meridian, despite his apparent ownership of the building and his mention of Holiday Enterprises, Jody realized with growing frustration that she knew remarkably little about Daniel beyond their charged conversations. She opened her laptop and typed Daniel Holiday Boston into the search bar. Thousands of results appeared, but most were business news articles about Holiday Enterprises' latest technological innovations or stock performance. The few photos showed Daniel at formal corporate events or giving presentations at technology conferences, always in the same immaculate suits, always with the same reserve she had initially observed before their conversation deepened. None of the images captured the man who had spoken so passionately about global health initiatives or who had held her with such gentle intensity. The public Daniel Holiday appeared as a distant, successful CEO, not the complex person who had shared her bed. More troubling was the realization that she couldn't actually confirm this was the same Daniel she had met. He had introduced himself simply as Daniel, and while Esther had called him Daniel Holiday, Jody had never verified this herself. The photographs showed a similar-looking man, but many were low resolution or taken from angles that obscured his features. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, closing her laptop in frustration. "I'm a Harvard-educated physician who can't even confirm the identity of a man I spent the night with." She tried a different approach, calling the Meridian's front desk. "Good morning, this is Dr. Jody Rosenblum. I was at the rooftop lounge last night and left an important medical journal with the owner of the building. I was told he maintains a residence on the top floor." The receptionist's voice remained professionally bland. "I'm sorry, Dr. Rosenblum, but we don't disclose information about our residents or guests. If you'd like to leave the item with us, we can attempt to deliver it." "That's not necessary. Thank you." Jody ended the call, embarrassed by her transparent attempt. She paced her apartment, her mind replaying fragments of their conversation for clues. He had mentioned the carbon capture facility in Norway, the mobile clinics in Indonesia, the research center at her own hospital. Surely these details could help her confirm his identity and possibly establish contact. Yet each attempt led to corporate websites with general contact information, press releases with formal statements from Holiday Enterprises, and business profiles that revealed nothing of the man himself. The private Daniel seemed to exist behind impenetrable barriers, separate from his public persona. After an hour of increasingly frustrated searching, Jody's phone rang with Esther's distinctive ringtone. "Finally!" her friend exclaimed the moment Jody answered. "I was about to send a search party." "Did you really spend the night with Daniel Holiday?" "The Daniel Holiday? I think so," Jody admitted. "Though I'm having trouble confirming that's actually who he was." "What do you mean?" "Of course it was him. The entire Meridian staff practically genuflected when he walked in." "What happened? Where is he now? Are you seeing him again?" "He's gone," Jody said simply. "He left while I was asleep. A car must have brought me home. He just left. Without exchanging numbers or anything." Esther's voice carried equal parts outrage and fascination. "He left a note." "Very brief." Jody glanced again at the cream-colored paper. "No contact information." "That's unusual. For a normal person, that would be ghosting, but for someone like Holiday, who's famously private and eccentric." Esther paused. "What exactly did you two talk about all night? And please tell me you didn't spend 4 hours discussing pediatric research protocols." "We talked about everything," Jody said quietly, sinking onto her sofa. "Global health systems. Technological innovation in medicine. Art and literature. Personal values. It was. I've never experienced a conversation like that before, Esther. It felt like he understood parts of me that I've never been able to articulate to anyone else." "Wow," Esther breathed. "That sounds intense. And then?" "And then yes, we went to his residence. The entire top floor of the Meridian." Jody closed her eyes, remembering. It was beautiful, minimalist but warm somehow. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. "We continued talking on his terrace, and then you finally did something spontaneous and wonderful," Esther finished for her. "I'm so proud. My little Jody, all grown up and having passionate encounters with billionaires." "It wasn't like that," Jody protested. "It wasn't casual. It felt significant. Meaningful." She struggled to find words that wouldn't sound overly romantic or naive. There was a recognition between us. A compatibility I've never experienced before. And yet he left you with just a note, Esther said gently. What exactly did it say? Jody picked up the heavy paper, running her finger along the precise handwriting. Thank you for a night I'll never forget. Life calls me away, but you've changed something in me. She read the words aloud, hearing their inadequacy in the face of what had transpired between them. That's cryptic, Esther observed. It's polite dismissal, Jody corrected, her clinical mind reasserting itself. Appreciative but final. You don't know that. Maybe he had an emergency. Maybe he's terrible at goodbyes. Maybe. Maybe it was exactly what it appeared to be, Jody interrupted. One exceptional night between two people who connected briefly before returning to their separate lives. Yet even as she spoke with such certainty, Jody found herself staring at the note again. The phrase "you've changed something in me" seemed to carry more weight than a casual parting sentiment. What had she changed? And why tell her if he never intended to see her again? The connection felt so real, she admitted, more to herself than to Esther. The way he looked at me, spoke to me, it wasn't performative or calculated. At least, it didn't seem that way. Because it probably wasn't, Esther insisted. Look, I've dealt with enough high-powered clients to know that men in his position don't typically spend entire evenings in deep conversation unless they're genuinely engaged. They value their time too highly. Then why disappear? Why not leave a number, an email, some way to continue the connection? Esther sighed. The minds of the ultra-wealthy are mysterious to mere mortals like us. Maybe he flies to Tokyo this morning for some billion-dollar negotiation. Maybe he has trust issues. Maybe. Maybe I should stop dwelling on it, Jody said firmly. It was one night. An anomaly. A deviation from my normal patterns that I can now file away as an interesting experience and move forward. Jody. I have patients who need me. Research that requires my attention. A department to run. I can't waste energy analyzing something that clearly wasn't meant to continue. The words sounded logical, reasonable, exactly the kind of pragmatic assessment Dr. Jody Rosenblum was known for. Yet as she spoke them, her eyes remained fixed on his handwriting, on the simple initial D that somehow contained multitudes. Sunlight had shifted across her apartment by the time Jody ended the call with Esther, who had extracted as many details as possible while offering increasingly elaborate theories about Daniel's abrupt departure, ranging from secret international business emergency to he's actually a spy with a cover to maintain. Jody moved to her closet, where her collection of professional attire hung in perfect chromatic order. The emerald dress now seemed out of place among the navy, black, and gray garments that defined her professional identity. She pushed it to the far end of the rack, where it would remain untouched, a memento of a night that already felt dreamlike in its improbability. One night of spontaneity was enough, she said aloud, reaching instead for a tailored gray suit. The familiar fabric felt like armor, like a return to the version of herself she understood and controlled. In her bathroom, she twisted her hair into its customary severe bun, pinning it securely in place. Each stroke of her makeup brush felt like an act of restoration, returning Dr. Jody Rosenblum to her proper form after the brief emergence of someone more open, more vulnerable. She carefully folded Daniel's note and placed it in her bedside drawer, closing it with a definitive push. No more searches. No more speculation. No more dwelling on possibilities that would distract from the carefully plotted course of her life. By the time she arrived at Boston Children's Hospital 2 hours later, still earlier than required despite her unprecedented late awakening, Jody had reconstructed her professional persona completely. She greeted colleagues with her usual measured nod, reviewed patient files with her characteristic thoroughness, and conducted rounds with focused efficiency. If anyone noticed the slight shadows beneath her expertly applied concealer or the occasional distant gaze when she momentarily paused between tasks, they attributed it to the natural adjustment period of a new department head learning to balance increased responsibilities. Dr. Rosenblum, her assistant, called as she returned from rounds. The board forwarded the quarterly research allocation requests for your review. They need your recommendations by Friday. Thank you, James. I'll start on them immediately. Jody accepted the thick folder, appreciating the weight of meaningful work in her hands. And Dr. Myers from oncology asked about collaborating on the immunotherapy trial. He said he left 3 messages yesterday. Schedule him for lunch tomorrow, Jody decided, already mentally outlining the potential research synergies. And please ask Dr. Winters to send over the latest data from the autoimmune study. I want to review the preliminary findings before our department meeting. With each directive, each decision, Jody felt herself settling more firmly into the role she had worked so hard to achieve. This was where she belonged, making a difference in children's lives, advancing medical knowledge, leading a department toward excellence. One exceptional night with a compelling stranger didn't change that fundamental truth. If anything, it had been a necessary release valve, a brief exploration of another version of herself before returning to the path she had chosen with such care and determination. By midweek, she had extended her already long working hours, arriving at the hospital before dawn and leaving well after most of her colleagues had gone home. She volunteered for additional committee responsibilities, accelerated her research timeline, and expanded her patient consultations. You're going to burn out at this pace, Dr. Reynolds, her mentor and the previous department head, cautioned when he found her reviewing case files at 9 in the evening. The job is a marathon, not a sprint, Jody. I'm fine, she assured him with her professional smile. Just establishing momentum for the new initiatives. But in the rare quiet moments waiting for elevator doors to open, pausing between patient consultations, lying awake in her bed before exhaustion claimed her, Daniel's face would appear in her mind. Not just his physical features, though those were certainly memorable, but the expression in his eyes when she had shared her thoughts about pediatric care in underserved communities. The attentive tilt of his head when she spoke. The genuine interest that had made her feel truly seen. In those moments, Jody would take a deep breath and deliberately redirect her thoughts to her next task, her next goal, her next achievement. The momentary disruption to her carefully ordered existence had been addressed and contained. Life continued according to plan. Days stretched into weeks with a rhythm of intensifying dedication. Spring bloomed across Boston while Jody remained largely oblivious to seasonal changes, her world narrowing to the hospital corridors, research laboratories, and administrative offices that defined her professional domain. The calendar on her kitchen wall, once merely structured, now contained scarcely a square inch of empty space. Blue hospital shifts expanded to fill evenings and weekends. Green research blocks multiplied across available hours. Even meal times became opportunities for productivity, working lunches, dinner meetings, breakfast conferences. In her office, stacks of medical journals grew taller, post-it notes multiplied across her computer monitor, and the whiteboard covering one wall became a complex matrix of department goals, research timelines, and patient care initiatives, all annotated in Jody's precise handwriting with measurable metrics and target completion dates. Her colleagues noticed the intensity but attributed it to the natural zeal of a new department head eager to prove herself. The board members remarked approvingly on her comprehensive reports and innovative proposals. Her research team struggled to keep pace with her accelerated timelines but admired her relentless focus. Only Esther seemed concerned by the escalation of Jody's already formidable work ethic. Their weekly dinners became monthly as Jody repeatedly rescheduled, citing urgent professional commitments. Their typically lengthy phone conversations shortened to brief text exchanges, often delayed by hours or days. Remember that thing called balance we sometimes discussed in theoretical terms? Esther texted one evening. Just checking if that concept still exists in the Rosenblum universe. Balance is overrated, Jody replied several hours later. Making headway on pediatric autoimmune research. Potential breakthrough. Talk next week. The truth, which Jody acknowledged only in her most honest moments, was that exhaustion provided protection. When she collapsed into bed after 18-hour days, sleep came quickly and deeply, leaving no space for wondering thoughts about what might have been. When every waking minute contained assigned professional purpose, no cognitive capacity remained for dwelling on a connection severed before it truly began. 6 weeks after the night at the Meridian, Jody's office whiteboard included a bold red circle around an upcoming date: her presentation to the National Pediatric Research Foundation, where she would outline her department's innovative approach to treating childhood autoimmune disorders. The prestigious invitation represented exactly the kind of professional recognition she had mapped out in her 5-year plan. "You've accomplished more in 6 weeks than most department heads achieve in 6 months, Dr. Reynolds remarked during their weekly mentorship meeting. "The board is impressed, though some of us are concerned about your sustainability." "I'm perfectly sustainable," Jody assured him, ignoring the persistent headache that had become her constant companion. "The presentation to the foundation is nearly complete, the NIH grant application is ahead of schedule, and patient satisfaction scores are up 12% since I implemented the new communication protocols." "And when was the last time you left the hospital before 8 p.m.? Or took a weekend completely off?" When Jody didn't immediately answer, he continued more gently, "Excellence requires recovery periods, Jody. Even the most sophisticated medical equipment needs downtime for maintenance." "I'll schedule some downtime after the foundation presentation," she promised, already mentally calculating how many additional research hours she could extract before then. That evening, as Jody reviewed her presentation notes for the 4th time, a wave of unexpected dizziness forced her to grip the edge of her desk. The fluorescent office light suddenly seemed too bright, the air too thin. Her body, which she typically treated as a functional vessel for her brilliant mind, was sending unmistakable distress signals. "Just need more coffee," she muttered, reaching for her cold cup. But as she lifted it, another wave of dizziness struck, stronger than before. The room tilted alarmingly, edges blurring as a strange hollow feeling expanded in her stomach. Jody barely made it to her private bathroom before the nausea overwhelmed her. Kneeling on the cold tile floor, head spinning, she was forced to confront a reality her rational mind had been ignoring for days. Something was wrong. And for the first time in her career, Dr. Jody Rosenblum, who had diagnosed countless complex medical conditions in others, felt genuine fear about her own health. The following morning, Jody sat in her office with the door locked, staring at a medical journal article as if it contained the secrets of the universe. The text described various causes of persistent nausea, dizziness, and fatigue in otherwise healthy young women. Each possibility came with its own diagnostic criteria, treatment protocols, and prognosis indicators. Her medical mind methodically eliminated options: mononucleosis, no fever or sore throat, anemia. Her vegetarian diet was carefully supplemented with iron, thyroid dysfunction, no weight changes or temperature sensitivity, vestibular disorders, no tinnitus or hearing changes. One possibility remained glaring on the page, so obvious that her initial refusal to consider it now seemed like willful professional negligence. "That's not possible," she whispered to her empty office. "I've always been careful. Methodical. Except for one night. One deviation from her rigidly controlled existence." With trembling hands, Jody reached into her desk drawer and withdrew a small paper bag, the contents purchased from a pharmacy across town, where no one would recognize the head of pediatric medicine at Boston Children's Hospital. 10 minutes later, she sat on the cold tile floor of her private bathroom, 3 plastic sticks arranged in a perfect row before her. Each displayed the same result with various symbols and indicators. Positive. 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 Her trained medical mind immediately calculated backward. 6 weeks and 4 days since the night at the Meridian. Consistent with her symptoms, the subtle fatigue she'd attributed to overwork, the occasional nausea she'd dismissed as stress, the strange aversions to certain foods in the hospital cafeteria. Dr. Jody Rosenblum, who had counseled countless teenage girls about responsible choices, who had built her life around careful planning and risk mitigation, was pregnant from a one-night encounter with a man who had disappeared without providing so much as a phone number. The absurdity of the situation struck her with such force that a strangled laugh escaped her lips, echoing against the bathroom tiles. If one of her residents had presented the scenario as a case study, she would have questioned their professional judgment for creating such an implausible example. Yet here she was, evidence literally in hand. Jody gathered the tests and sealed them in a biohazard bag, medical training creating automatic responses even in personal crisis. She stood before the small bathroom mirror, studying her reflection with clinical detachment. Confirm before concluding, she murmured, reciting the diagnostic principle she taught all her medical students. Pharmacy tests could give false positives. Proper blood work and examination were required for definitive diagnosis. 2 days later, Jody sat in an examination room at Massachusetts General Hospital, deliberately chosen for its location across the city from her own workplace. As a department head at Boston Children's, privacy was paramount. The last thing she needed was colleagues witnessing her in an obstetrician's waiting room before she had processed the situation herself. Dr. Elaine Chen, a respected reproductive specialist Jody knew from medical conferences, studied the ultrasound screen with professional focus. Jody had selected her specifically competent, discreet, and not directly connected to her professional circle. Blood work confirms the pregnancy, Dr. Chen said, her tone matter of fact as one physician speaking to another. HCG levels are significantly elevated for 6 weeks. Higher than I would typically expect. Jody nodded, maintaining clinical detachment despite her racing heart. Possibly indicating multiple gestation. Let's take a look. Dr. Chen moved the ultrasound wand methodically across Jody's abdomen. There's the gestational sac, and... She paused, adjusting settings and leaning closer to the screen. Something in her colleague's expression made Jody's pulse quicken. What is it? I'm detecting multiple embryonic structures, Dr. Chen said carefully, continuing her examination. 1, 2, 3. Her hand stilled as she focused intently on the screen. Dr. Rosenblum, I'm identifying 4 distinct embryonic developments. Each with cardiac activity. 4. Jody's medical composure faltered momentarily. That's not possible. Spontaneous quadruplets occur in approximately 1 in 700,000 pregnancies. The statistical probability is nevertheless what we're observing, Dr. Chen interrupted gently, turning the screen so Jody could see more clearly. 4 separate embryos, each in individual amniotic sacs. Monochorionic quadruplets. Jody stared at the screen, her medical training automatically identifying what her emotional self could barely comprehend. 4 tiny formations, each with the flickering pulse that indicated developing cardiac function. Not one unexpected life developing inside her, but 4. This is extremely rare for a natural conception, Dr. Chen continued, her professional tone softening slightly. Were you taking any fertility medications? No, Jody whispered, unable to look away from the screen. Nothing. This was unexpected. Dr. Chen nodded, continuing her measurements and documentation. While I complete the examination, I should inform you that a quadruplet pregnancy is classified as extremely high risk. The maternal complications include increased risk of preeclampsia, gestational diabetes, and premature labor. The fetal risks include low birth weight, developmental complications, and higher mortality rates. The statistics flowed automatically in Jody's mind, her research background supplying precise numbers for each risk factor. Quadruplet pregnancies rarely reached full term. Average delivery occurred around 30 weeks gestation. Over 95% required NICU care. The cost of medical management alone would be astronomical, not to mention the long-term considerations. Given your medical background, I assume you're familiar with selective reduction as an option, Dr. Chen said carefully. It would significantly reduce risks to both you and the remaining fetuses. Jody nodded mechanically, her eyes still fixed on the 4 tiny heartbeats pulsing on the screen. As a doctor, she understood the medical rationale perfectly. As a pediatrician who had fought to save countless premature infants, the concept took on different dimensions. "I'll need time," she managed, her voice sounding distant to her own ears. "To consider all options." "Of course," Dr. Chen agreed, completing her documentation. "However, if reduction is chosen, the procedure is optimally performed between weeks 10 and 14. That gives you a relatively narrow window for decision-making." As the examination concluded and Jody redressed behind the privacy screen, her mind worked with analytical precision despite her emotional shock. 4 children. From one night. The statistical improbability was so extreme that it bordered on the impossible. Yet the evidence was undeniable. The physical reality was already altering her body's chemistry, would soon transform her physical form, would ultimately redefine her entire existence if she proceeded. Jody sat across from Dr. Chen's desk, a folder of prenatal information and referrals clutched in her hands. The office felt suddenly too small, the air too thin, as the full magnitude of the situation descended upon her. "Quadruplets," she repeated, the medical term failing to capture the monumental implications. 4 babies. At once. Dr. Chen nodded, her expression compassionate but direct. "I want to be very clear about the medical challenges ahead, Dr. Rosenblum. With your background, I won't soften the reality." "Please don't," Jody agreed, clinging to clinical facts as a lifeline amidst emotional turbulence. "Quadruplet pregnancies carry significant risks," Dr. Chen began, opening a medical text to an annotated page. "Maternal risks include heightened probability of preeclampsia, approaching 60% in multiple gestations of this magnitude. Gestational diabetes risk increases to approximately 35%. Premature labor is almost certain. The average quadruplet pregnancy delivers at approximately 30 weeks. Each statistic landed with the weight of Jody's accumulated medical knowledge behind it. She knew exactly what these conditions meant, could visualize the potential complications with professional clarity. "For the fetuses, intrauterine growth restriction is common," Dr. Chen continued. "Competition for nutritional resources often results in asymmetrical development. Twin-to-twin transfusion syndrome is possible, though less common with quadruplets than twins. And the likelihood of all 4 reaching viability?" Jody asked, her doctor's mind still functioning despite her personal shock. Dr. Chen's expression softened slightly. "In recent years, with optimal prenatal care and monitoring, approximately 80% of quadruplets survive to discharge from NICU. However, long-term developmental outcomes vary considerably." The room seemed to tilt slightly as Jody processed the information not as new knowledge, but as newly relevant to her personal reality. The medical part of her brain calculated variables while the human part struggled to comprehend the magnitude of what was happening. "Your case presents additional complexities," Dr. Chen added carefully. "Your age of 28 is favorable, and your overall health is excellent. However, your professional responsibilities as department head involve significant stress and physical demands. Complete bed rest will likely be necessary by the 20th week, possibly earlier." 5 months, Jody whispered. "Unable to work for at least 5 months." The professional implications alone were staggering. "At minimum," Dr. Chen confirmed. "And post-delivery recovery would be substantial, especially if cesarean delivery becomes necessary, which is likely with quadruplets." Jody nodded mechanically, her mind already calculating the impact on her career trajectory, her research initiatives, her leadership of the department she had worked so hard to secure. "There's also the matter of your support system," Dr. Chen said gently. Carrying and raising quadruplets is challenging under optimal circumstances. Without an extensive support network. She left the sentence unfinished, its implications clear. I understand, Jody said, her voice steadier than she felt. And I appreciate your directness. We should discuss your options, Dr. Chen continued. Selective reduction to twins would significantly decrease risks to both you and the remaining fetuses. Many physicians in high-risk situations like yours choose this path for medical reasons. The words hung in the air between them, a clinical solution, medically sound, routinely recommended in such extreme cases. As a doctor, Jody understood the rationale perfectly. As the person carrying 4 developing lives, the calculation felt vastly different. I need time, she said finally. Not to make a public announcement or anything, but to process this. To consider all aspects. Of course. However, certain decisions have time constraints, Dr. Chen reminded her. I'd suggest consulting with a high-risk obstetric specialist as soon as possible. I've included several referrals in your folder. As Jody gathered her things to leave, Dr. Chen's professional demeanor softened slightly. Dr. Rosenblum, Jody speaking not just as your physician but as a colleague, this is an extraordinary situation that would challenge anyone, regardless of their medical knowledge or professional accomplishments. Whatever decisions you make will require significant support. Please don't attempt to manage this alone. Jody nodded, unable to form words as the magnitude of her situation continued to expand in her mind. 4 heartbeats. 4 potential lives. 4 children who would depend entirely on her. And she couldn't even reach their father to tell him he had helped create them. The taxi ride home from Dr. Chen's office passed in a blur, Boston's familiar streets seeming suddenly foreign as Jody's world reconstructed itself around the impossible reality of 4 developing lives within her. She clutched the medical folder to her chest, its contents simultaneously representing professional facts she had known for years and personal truths she was only beginning to comprehend. Inside her apartment, Jody moved directly to her kitchen wall calendar, the meticulously organized record of her carefully planned life. Each color-coded entry, each precisely scheduled achievement, each step of her 5-year career plan stared back at her with stark irrelevance. With trembling fingers, she counted forward to approximately 30 weeks from conception. Mid-November. The date fell directly on the week she was scheduled to present her department's groundbreaking research at the International Pediatric Conference in London, a career-defining opportunity she had worked toward for years. That won't be happening, she whispered to the empty room. Her eyes moved across the calendar's remaining months, board meetings she would miss, research deadlines that would go unmet, the department review cycle she would be absent for. Years of strategic positioning and careful advancement suddenly rendered meaningless by 4 microscopic cellular developments that defied statistical probability. Jody sank into a kitchen chair, one hand unconsciously moving to rest on her still flat abdomen. The logical, methodical approach that had guided her through every challenge suddenly failed her. There was no protocol for this situation, no established best practice to follow, no research she could consult for optimal outcomes. For perhaps the first time in her adult life, Dr. Jody Rosenblum faced a situation she could not control through careful planning and disciplined execution. A sob escaped her throat, startling in its rawness, its unfiltered emotion breaking through her composed exterior. Once begun, the feelings could not be contained. Tears flowed freely as she gasped for breath, her body shaking with the force of emotions she typically kept tightly managed. Fear. Confusion. Anxiety. Anger at the statistical improbability. Anger at Daniel for disappearing. Anger at herself for the one night of spontaneity that had altered everything. And beneath it all, something else, a strange, protective instinct toward the 4 tiny lives developing within her, already disrupting her carefully ordered existence. When the intensity of emotion finally subsided, Jody found herself curled on her sofa, physically and mentally exhausted. The afternoon light cast long shadows across her apartment as she stared blankly at the ceiling, her analytical mind finally reasserting itself. She needed a plan. Even for this unprecedented situation, even for this complete derailment of her life's careful trajectory, she needed systematic assessment and strategic response. Rising unsteadily, Jody moved to her home office and pulled out a fresh legal pad. At the top, she wrote options in her precise handwriting, then drew a line down the center of the page. On the left side, she began listing the medical and practical options available to her. Selective reduction to twins or singleton. Continue with quadruplet pregnancy. Adoption placement after birth. Medical leave options from hospital. Research sabbatical possibilities. Financial implications of each scenario. Child care requirements and costs. Housing considerations, current 2B are insufficient. Career impact assessment. On the right side, she found herself unable to write anything at all. The emotional, personal dimensions of each option remained too overwhelming to capture in her typically organized fashion. How could she quantify the feeling she'd experienced seeing 4 heartbeats on the monitor? How could she analyze the conflicting emotions about a pregnancy that simultaneously represented the greatest challenge to her career and the most profound biological connection she'd ever experienced? Most perplexingly, how could she make any decision without informing Daniel, a man who had clearly chosen to exit her life, yet whose genetic contribution had created this unprecedented situation? Jody stared at the half-completed analysis, at the stark contrast between her ability to outline practical considerations and her inability to process the emotional dimensions. The incompleteness of the page reflected the fundamental inadequacy of her usual approach to this entirely new reality. For the first time in her life, logic alone could not guide her path forward. As twilight descended over Boston, Jody found herself pacing her apartment, the crucial decision points becoming clearer even as their complexity deepened. Her medical career, the focus of her existence since childhood, stood at a critical juncture. The department head position she'd achieved at 28 represented not just personal accomplishment but the platform from which she intended to revolutionize pediatric treatment protocols nationwide. Her research on childhood autoimmune disorders was showing promising preliminary results. The grant applications she'd submitted could fund breakthroughs that might help thousands of children. All of that now hung in precarious balance against 4 tiny heartbeats. If I continue this pregnancy, she said aloud, systematically working through scenarios as if presenting a complex case to her residents, I will require bed rest by 20 weeks. That means stepping down as department head. No board would maintain my position through such an extended absence. The professional implications cascaded through her mind, research initiatives stalled, carefully cultivated institutional relationships weakened, her hard-won authority within the hospital hierarchy diminished. Even if she returned after delivery, the landscape would have shifted, opportunities redistributed, momentum lost. 5 years of strategic career building, effectively reset. If I choose selective reduction, she continued, forcing herself to articulate the alternative, the medical risks decrease significantly. Carrying twins would still require modified duties, but possibly not complete bed rest. I could potentially maintain limited departmental oversight, preserve key research directions, and return to full duties more quickly. The medical rationale was sound. Many physicians would make the same recommendation to a patient in her situation. Yet each time Jody tried to consider it as her own choice, the memory of 4 distinct heartbeats on the ultrasound screen interrupted her clinical reasoning. Beyond the immediate medical decision loomed the even more daunting question of raising 4 children simultaneously as a single mother with a demanding career. The logistics alone are nearly impossible, she muttered, moving to her laptop to research quadruplet parenting resources. The search results overwhelmed her: specialized vehicles to transport 4 infants, rotating feeding and sleeping schedules that allowed parents barely 2 hours of continuous rest, financial requirements that would strain even her substantial physician's salary. Most concerning were the accounts from parents of quadruplets describing the relentless physical and emotional demands. Even couples with extensive family support networks reported extreme stress, relationship strain, and complete disruption of professional capacities for years following birth. And she would be facing this alone. Her mother, Ruth, lived in assisted living now, her health too fragile to provide child care support. Esther, while a devoted friend, had her own demanding legal career. Hired help was an option, but the cost of qualified round-the-clock child care for quadruplets would be astronomical. I would need to downsize professionally, Jody acknowledged, the prospect both painful and clarifying. Part-time clinical work, minimal research, no administrative duties. Everything I built, scaled back drastically. The alternative, continuing her career trajectory while raising 4 children alone, seemed functionally impossible, regardless of financial resources or scheduling creativity. The physical demands alone would exceed human capacity. Jody sank into her desk chair, confronting the stark reality: this pregnancy, if continued, would fundamentally redefine her professional identity. The carefully constructed career she had sacrificed for, the position of influence she had earned through relentless work, the future impact she had planned to have on pediatric medicine, all would be profoundly altered, possibly permanently. Yet the thought of terminating any of the pregnancies created a visceral discomfort that surprised her. Despite her scientific rationality, despite her clear understanding of the medical and practical justifications, something within her resisted the clinical solution. "This isn't just about me anymore," she whispered, her hand again finding her abdomen in an unconscious gesture of connection. The realization landed with unexpected weight: her decisions now affected 5 lives, not just her own. For someone who had lived entirely self-directed, this shift in perspective was perhaps the most disorienting aspect of her new reality. Dawn found Jody still awake, seated at her kitchen table with her laptop open and multiple browser tabs displaying information about Holiday Enterprises, its holdings, and its enigmatic founder. The night's research had yielded corporate headquarters locations, subsidiary companies, and public appearances scheduled months in advance, but no direct contact information for Daniel himself. During those sleepless hours, a resolution had crystallized within her. Whatever decisions she made about this pregnancy would be hers alone. She neither needed nor wanted Daniel Holliday's financial support or interference. Her independence remained non-negotiable. But he deserved to know. Not because of any romantic notions about their connection, she assured herself. Not because she harbored fantasies of his involvement or commitment. But because fundamental ethical principles demanded it. If their positions were reversed, she would want to know about children carrying her genetic material, regardless of the circumstances of conception. "It's about medical history," she rationalized aloud, typing notes on her phone. "Family disease predispositions. Genetic markers. Information any responsible physician would want documented." Yet beneath these practical justifications lay something more elemental, the conviction that life-altering truths should not be hidden, regardless of convenience or complication. 4 human lives were beginning because of their brief encounter. Whatever walls of privacy Daniel Holliday had constructed around his existence, this development warranted penetrating them. "I'm not asking for anything," Jody practiced, envisioning the conversation. "I simply believe you should be informed about biological children resulting from our interaction. What you do with that information is entirely your decision." The measured, clinical phrasing felt appropriate, detached, factual, without emotional expectations. She would present the reality as a medical development, not a personal entanglement. With renewed determination, Jody opened her email and began composing a message to the general contact address for Holiday Enterprises. Professional, succinct, and specific enough to potentially reach him without revealing sensitive details to administrative gatekeepers. "Attention, Mr. Daniel Holliday, CEO. Subject: urgent personal matter requiring direct communication. Message: Mr. Holliday, we met at the Meridian 6 weeks ago. I need to speak with you regarding an important personal matter with significant implications. This is not a financial or legal issue, but it requires direct communication. Please contact me at your earliest convenience. She included her private email and cell number, then hesitated before pressing send. Would such a vague message make it past layers of corporate filters? Would it be dismissed as yet another attempt to access the billionaire by someone claiming personal connection? After consideration, she added one final line: the matter concerns the Verde Emeraldo that reminds you of sunrise over the Amazon rainforest. The specific reference to her dress and his unusual comment about it might trigger recognition if he personally reviewed the message. With a deep breath, she sent the email, knowing the chances of it reaching him were minimal. First attempt of many, she murmured, already planning alternative approaches. The Holiday Enterprises headquarters in Boston would be her next target. Perhaps a hand-delivered letter might bypass digital gatekeepers. If that failed, she would explore medical connections. The research wing he had funded at her hospital might provide institutional pathways to contact him. Whatever obstacles his privacy measures presented, Dr. Jody Rosenblum would overcome them with the same methodical determination she applied to complex medical cases. Not for romantic reconciliation, not for financial support, but because principles mattered. Truth mattered. He deserved to know that 4 lives had begun as a result of their connection, even if that connection had lasted only one night. As morning light filled her apartment, Jody placed one hand protectively over her abdomen, a gesture that was becoming instinctive despite its unfamiliarity. Whatever decisions lay ahead, medical, professional, personal, she would make them with the systematic thoroughness that defined her character. But those decisions would be better informed with complete information, including Daniel Holliday's response to news that would alter his reality as profoundly as it had altered hers. "You're what?" Esther's voice escalated to a pitch that made neighboring diners at the small cafe turn their heads. She immediately lowered her volume but not her intensity. "Pregnant? From that night at the Meridian? With Daniel Holliday?" Jody nodded, glancing around to ensure they weren't attracting too much attention. She had chosen this location carefully, far from the hospital, tucked away on a quiet side street where she was unlikely to encounter colleagues. "Not just pregnant," she corrected quietly. "Quadruplets." Esther's coffee cup froze midway to her lips. "Quad 4? As in, 4 babies? At once?" "Yes. 4 embryos, 4 heartbeats, 4 developing fetuses." Jody's clinical terminology contrasted sharply with Esther's emotional response. "Monochorionic quadruplets. Extremely rare in natural conception. Approximately 1 in 700,000 pregnancies." "Oh my God, Jody." Esther set down her cup, reaching across the table to grasp her friend's hand. "That's... I don't even have words. How are you feeling? What did the doctor say? What are you going to do?" The rapid-fire questions matched the whirlwind that had been circulating in Jody's mind for days. "Physically, I'm experiencing standard first trimester symptoms. Medically, it's classified as extremely high risk. And what I'm going to do?" She took a deep breath. "That's still undetermined. Have you told anyone else? Your mom? The hospital? Just you? And no, I'm not ready for institutional disclosure. That becomes necessary only if I decide to continue the pregnancy." Esther studied her friend's face carefully. "If so, you're considering all options." "I'm a doctor, Esther. I understand the medical realities. Quadruplet pregnancies carry significant risks to both mother and fetuses. Selective reduction to twins would dramatically improve outcomes. And how do you feel about that? Not as Dr. Rosenblum, but as Jody." The question cut through Jody's clinical detachment, touching the confusion she'd been avoiding confronting directly. "I don't know," she admitted. "Every time I start analyzing it rationally, I remember seeing those 4 heartbeats on the ultrasound, and rational analysis becomes challenging. Esther nodded, squeezing her hand. That makes perfect sense. This isn't just a medical case study. It's your life, your body. She paused, then added more gently, and what about Daniel? Have you contacted him? I've tried, Jody said, frustration evident in her voice. I sent an email to Holiday Enterprises' general contact address, but received no response. I attempted to call their corporate headquarters but couldn't get past receptionists. I even considered showing up at their Boston offices, but security procedures make that approach unlikely to succeed. And you're sure it was really him? Daniel Holiday? Esther asked. I mean, I recognized him that night, but we'd both had champagne, and the lighting was dim. That's actually my primary challenge, Jody admitted. I have no definitive confirmation it was truly Daniel Holiday. You identified him as such, the Meridian staff treated him with extraordinary deference, and he owned the penthouse level. But he introduced himself only as Daniel, and I never verified his last name directly. Esther frowned, opening her tablet case. Let's approach this systematically. What concrete information do you have about him? First name Daniel. Approximately 6'1". Athletic build. Dark hair, dark eyes. Age mid to late 30s. Owner of the Meridian penthouse. Jody's catalog of details continued with methodical precision. Spoke knowledgeably about global health initiatives, carbon capture technology, and art installations in Tokyo. Mentioned building eco-resorts in the Amazon and funding mobile clinics in Indonesia. Drank Macallan 25. Had a small scar above his right eyebrow. Wait, Esther interrupted, her fingers pausing over her tablet. The scar detail. That's distinctive. She began typing rapidly, then turned the screen toward Jody. Is this him?